Doesn't matter.
Okay, my name is Roxanne Ashley. I did reside in Pruitt-Igoe for 16 years of my life. Those were some of the best years of my life. Down there, we had unity. I learned to survive. We had a lot of close-knit family, friends. The education was good in the elementary school I went to. I also attended Bashan High School. I went to Secretariat School. My first job was at American Red Cross. From there, I worked at Equifax Services, which was located then here in the city of St. Louis on Olive Boulevard. Then I further extended my education in the medical field, which I worked since 1982 up until 2013. I have 3 other sisters which all of them do hold some type of college degree. And like I say, I enjoyed my life down there. We had lots of fun, and things went on there, just like with everywhere else, but I don't have anything bad to say. I enjoyed my life there.
My name is James Thomas, and I reside in Pruitt-Igoe, and my experience there was real good. Me and my family, especially my mother, she took care of us because she was my mother and my father. And things in Pruitt-Igoe that I liked about, because people had unity and structure, Yes, I got, like the movie say, I got in a little trouble, Like everybody gonna get in trouble to get a little bit of respect, So my mother, we was a Christian family, And if you didn't go to church, you couldn't go to the show. We would go down out in Wellston shopping. That's when the bus was called 15 cents. She'd go buy tennis shoes and stuff like that there. And like I say, it was 2 projects. It was the Pruitt and the Igoe, So everybody, like unity came together. That's when they started calling it Pruitt-Igoe, But other than that, I just had a beautiful time there when I stayed there.
My name's Russ Henderson. I teach history here at East Central. I don't have the personal experience of being resident of Pruitt-Igoe, but my parents are native St. Louisans. My father grew up in Hyde Park and lived most of his life on Taylor until 1962, and then they moved to O'Fallon Park. My mother lived south of Highway 70. She lived on Bulwer Avenue, which was very close to the river. Their experiences with Pruitt-Igoe were a little bit different. My father's uncle lived in Pruitt-Igoe from 1952 to 1953. His family moved out in 1953. He had a factory job at Duke Manufacturing on North Broadway. He got a promotion, and when he got his promotion, he moved his family out of Pruitt-Igoe into a single-family home, also in Hyde Park, near his brother. I think the film indicates that the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954 was sort of the turning point in that shift from Pruitt-Igoe being semi-integrated to being completely segregated. I think that from a historical standpoint, it's a little bit false. Some of the work I did as an undergraduate at Washington University was to interview people who lived in Pruitt-Igoe. And what our team found was that The white residents who lived in Pruitt-Igoe saw Pruitt-Igoe as temporary housing. They saw it as a step to somewhere else, in particular single-family home, either on the north side of the city or on the south side of the city, one or the other. The people we interviewed who were the African-American residents saw from our interviews that Pruitt-Igoe was permanent housing. That's where they were going to make their community. That's where they were going to move from. Most of the people that we interviewed were from Mill Creek Valley. Mill Creek Valley, as the film kind of danced around a little bit, was basically the area today of Harristow, Vashon, that area there. In 1959, the city of St. Louis began a project to basically get rid of Mill Creek Valley. It had been one of the areas in which African Americans who were very, very poor had inhabited. And what the city intended with Mill Creek Valley was to use it as an area as they called urban renewal. It was going to be the place that abutted the Central West End, where you could have a Central West End that would move a little bit eastward. And who they hoped to move in there, of course, were middle-class and upper-class whites, who would then surround St. Louis University, who would surround the western part of the city and then revitalize it from there. As they began that project, they started to call Mill Creek Valley Hiroshima Flats, because they leveled it to the degree that it actually looked like a bomb had gone off there. And then in the fall of 1959, there was a tornado. And that tornado pretty much knocked out the rest of Mill Creek Valley. The problem the city faced in 1959 was what to do with the residents. And what they chose to do was to send those people to Pruitt-Igoe. Prior to that point, Pruitt-Igoe, as was talked about in the film, had a screening process. There were people from the Housing Authority in the city of St. Louis, plus federal workers who would interview people, as the one resident indicated, to figure out who were the people who should be moving into Pruitt-Igoe. Once the tornado hit and there was this question of what to do with these people, they stopped the screening process altogether just to get them into. And what we found in our interviews was that many of the African-American residents pointed to 1959 as the crucial turning point. As beginning in 1959, those folks in our interviews indicated that things then started going downhill. And what they pointed to as one of the people I interviewed said, if it had not been for that tornado, Pruitt-Igoe would have stayed the way it was in the 1950s. But as they said, a different class of people moved in once that tornado and the Mill Creek Valley development started to take place, and that seemed to change the dynamic. But that really wasn't mentioned much in the film. So that comes, as I said, I don't have the direct experience, but I do have this experience interviewing these folks. That's what we found out in our team of interviews. I'm not sure if what I found out in our team is the same as what you experienced, but that's what we found out.
You know, our family came from the Mill Creek area and moved to Pruitt-Igoe in 1960.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm Bill Cunningham, teach sociology here at the college, as many of you know. My only real experience with Pruitt-Igoe was when I was in graduate school at Washington U working on my master's in social work. One of our instructors was very well connected with the Urban Renewal Project at Jeff Vanderloo. And so we toured Jeff Vanderloo, and they had talked about how devastating the closing of the brown shoe plant was right there in that neighborhood, as far as how it affected the residents of Pruitt-Igoe directly. And I think if, you know, hindsight's obviously so much easier once you watch a film like this and you see, you know, you have a federal policy that seems to try and help people. It's trying to do a tremendous thing. And it's really a shame that they really didn't realize that they could have done so much more. In other words, if you really want to try and build a community, you know, even though it's a housing project, you could have put so many services within the complex itself, and basically you could have tried to create even more unity, even though many of the residents there, the ones that found unity with certain families and tried to strive for that, you actually could have tried to create even more unity through maybe not that you would have completely eliminated all the crime, are some of the, maybe some of the bad behavior that went on, but you could at least have tried to address it as a community and tried to make the community even stronger. But obviously we have the hindsight of doing that. And so you would hope that the city, if they're going to create new projects like the one they're handing to Mr. McKee up in North St. Louis right now, you would hope that there would be an intention anyway, to try and create another community so that you could try and stop some of the things that unfortunately happened in the Pruitt-Igoe situation.
Well, I'm Wendy Pekka, and I'm one of the psychology instructors here on campus. I don't have any personal experience with Pruitt-Igoe. I was asked to kind of speak from the psychological perspective. And I think this film in particular does a nice job of illustrating what a lot of developmental psychologists call the biopsychosocial perspective, where it's a fancy way of saying that there's a lot of complex things that affect our individual behavior. Not only genetic inheritance, but individual experiences like temperament, personality traits. Did you experience some kind of violent crime growing up? Then as well as the sociocultural aspect of behavior, and that would include things like your parenting styles, peer influences, where you live, where you grow up. And I think this film does a nice job in what you all have expressed, that, everyone has an individual experience that's very indifferent. And so they do a nice job, I think, illustrating a lot of that. And that's what psychology is all about, is the study of individual behavior. The other piece I think that's super important is that idea that social support networks really do help to mitigate some of the difficulties that we face in our lives. So in particular, poverty really has a lot of negative effects on our lives in terms of stress and health and wellness. But the social support networks that sound like were developed in pockets in Pruitt-Igoe, I think, really seemed to help mitigate some of the poverty that individuals faced. So, a few thoughts.
So I guess we'll open up the questions.
If we can see them.
We can see you.
Are you familiar with the Le Corbusier Radiant City concept? He was a urban designer. The communists and Marxists loved it. And the Pruitt-Igoe was just a perfect example of the Radiant City. The large skyscraper in a park. And in Soviet countries, it worked pretty good because if you didn't do what they wanted, they shot you. But I think, what things do you think we have had to learn? What would be the biggest thing you think? I remember seeing this as a child. My father worked in the city, and seeing this project, and I was terrified as a kid, I wonder what that is, and we never talked about it. But what do you think is the biggest thing you've learned from this experience?
Well, again, speaking from a historical standpoint, that the city of St. Louis has had constant urban renewal since it first wrote its first strategic plan in 1907. It was the very first city in America to have a strategic plan for the future, and that plan was to last 40 years. The person who wrote it, Harold Bartholomew, was the first practitioner of the urban plan, and he convinced the city founders right after the World's Fair that what St. Louis needed to do in order to make itself a first-class city like Chicago and St. Louis was to build itself anew. So what he recommended was to knock down areas that were dedicated slum. The code word in the plan was a blighted area or an obsolete area. The 1907 plan went into effect. It began knocking down areas, rebuilding them anew. They rewrote the plan in 1947, same basic idea. If St. Louis was to catch up with other cities, what St. Louis needed to do was to rebuild. Not to revitalize, not to care for what it had, but to rebuild. And part of Pruitt-Igoe was this rebuilding of the city, that people would look to St. Louis as a Midwestern city on a hill that was comparable to Chicago. Fortunately, it didn't turn out that way. The difference of the plan that's currently being proposed in the north part of the city now is that it is partially about revitalizing areas, not about tearing everything down and starting all over, but about revitalizing. So one thing that the St. Louis City Housing Authority has learned is that you cannot knock down and flatten the entire city. What you have to do is you have to pick the places that you cherish, rebuild those around some central focus, whether it be the water tower on Grand or the column on Grand. Make that the thing that people focus on, and then you knock down the parts that are the most absolute decrepit parts to get people to come back. But there's got to be a focus. It can't be just a brand new building. There's got to be something that St. Louisans can identify. And that's what I think is the little bit of the difference that is going on in old North St. Louis today and going up towards Natural Bridge. Is that's the basic idea. So as from a historical standpoint, St. Louis has learned we may not be Chicago, and that's okay. We may not be New York, and that's okay. How about if we be just the best St. Louis we can be?
Right.
I guess my take, going along with what Russ was saying, Pruitt-Igoe won 17 architectural awards, as far as nominated for 17 awards. However, I'm not sure they contacted or met with any of the residents prior to throwing it up to say, hey, would you like to live in a facility like this? And I think sometimes our policies that are made by federal, state, local governments are sometimes a little short-sighted and thinking we know best what's for you. Instead of sitting down with the community and saying, let's put a community together, how can we best do this? And make sure that we have all the services and resources that are available. The thing that pains me, being a native of St. Louis and myself, I've still lived there. I've been there. I lived in South St. Louis City. Now I live out in the county. But it kind of pains me that the city waits and waits and waits for someone like Mr. McKee to come along. They don't have the progressive foresight to say, what kind of city do we want to have? And could we, are lofts the best thing? If you notice all the lofts going up in the city today. And then secondly, if you notice most of the neighborhoods that are becoming very dilapidated, the children that live in those neighborhoods have hardly any resources. You have no youth centers. They don't have a church that provides a youth group. Then what do you expect? Not that I'm condoning what they do, but if you want to know why those are high crime areas sometimes, it's because they're bored. And again, it's because the community doesn't say, let's look ahead. Let's try and figure out what's the best for the community. So I feel Pruitt-Igoe is just an example of how we don't involve everybody, either because we don't want to have to go through all the muck of saying, let's get everybody around the table, kind of like a Ferguson-Florissant situation. By the way, that's next week's topic. But is it a problem with trying to get everybody around the table, or is it just easier to just throw it up and let's see what happens? So that would be that's my take on the experience.
Try to get everybody around the table.
Sorry?
Yes. Sure they do. They have one every year, maybe twice a year, every year. But not a lot. I have a few selected friends, like I say, that I grew up with 10 and 12 years old. We're still friends right today.
That's fantastic.
We attend, they brothers and sisters attend. Sure, it's good. Everyone say they really enjoy it and looks forward to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, the way the city of St. Louis has done it, it's conducted scientific studies. Sure. She asked, how do places get chosen for renewal development? The way the city did it, and I'm not sure this is the process today, but the way it did it in the past was they chose the places that they believed to be the most in desperate need of knocking down, the places that were the most embarrassing, the places that were the oldest, the places that had the highest crime rates. And conveniently, those places were always the ones with the poorest of the poor. They were also places that, in many times, as the film alluded to, that developers wanted to have because they fit certain zoning regulations. St. Louis was one of the first cities to go to zoning. The purpose behind zoning was to make sure that you didn't develop a city like Houston, where you may have a house, an office building, and a factory all on the same street. The city of St. Louis in the 1920s created a zoning regulation based on building height. And what they wanted was a business district, a light industrial district, and then a residential district. Problem was that the city had these residential pockets inside of these zoning areas, so the places that they usually picked to renew were the oldest places in the city where the poorest residents were residing. And what they hoped then, of course, was by replacing them with newer things that could generate some economic development, like a ballpark, Busch Stadium, the Arch, which knocked down several different residential areas, a gigantic warehousing complex, taking Highway 70 through downtown, which split my mother and her family from the rest of the city because they were caught on the eastern side of 70. That's how the city of St. Louis did it. And there was no, as Bill indicated, there wasn't much forethought into it beyond how can this place make the city the most dollars it possibly can. And they weren't thinking about the people who were living there. They were thinking about what could we build there to become an attraction to draw income, revenue, prosperity. That I don't know. I'm a historian.
Currently, what typically happens is what Mr. McKee has done. He's gone to the city, given them a plan as to how he'd like to redevelop the north side of the city. And he could only do it if he could get so much tax incentive financing, meaning he had to have help with the money. And he finally convinced the city as to the dollar amount, and that's why they're supposed to be starting soon.
That's good to know.
After Pruitt-Igoe, did you move out to Colorado? They felt more secluded once they moved away from places like Pruitt-Igoe. Was that the same for you guys?
No, I continue to live in the city, as I do today, None of that bothered me. It didn't have an impact on my life, to stop me from accomplishing anything I wanted to in life, Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Do you feel like if the area was self-sustaining at any amount, do you feel like it would still be there?
Well, like in the movie, like she said, as far as with the water and all that, there was no, it was beyond being livable, at that point, but if that part wasn't in there, I think that probably crime rate could have been tolerated, because it just wasn't that bad, they just didn't go around killing people, you know what I mean, and anything like that. I never witnessed anything, I never was involved in anything, I had good times,
Well, I was referring to like if maybe, I don't know, like a few orchards or even some crops or something had been planted, like, do you think people would have actually maybe wanted to stay there even longer? And it would have been, more livable, I guess?
Well, I don't know because a lot of people were city people, so they didn't do that type of, gardening or anything like that, It took me a long time to learn how to use a lawnmower, But my neighbor, she been knowing, so that way, Mm-hmm. No, I think they were welfare recipients, and that was a part of their law, that the father couldn't reside in the home with the kids, because they receiving monies from the state. Basically that's what it was,
I'm sorry, I think she asked the same question I want. The rationale why fathers couldn't be there or the men.
Well, like they said, it was a government-funded program, for single parents.
It was,
But some of my friends, their dads lived there, they were married. They worked the mother and the father, so, I don't know if that was before my time or what, but,
yeah, it was aid to families with dependent children.
right.
So the children had to be dependent.
Mm-hmm.
So they couldn't have two parents.
And,
So they told the father he couldn't stay in the apartment. They still wanted to get the apartment as well as continue to receive their
benefits.
public assistance.
Mm-hmm.
True.
It's kind of much goes on probably like that today. It's still the same.
Oh, it's still the same.
It's still the same.
Mm-hmm.
But as
The father having to move away, with your experience, do you feel that people's fathers were still part of their lives at all, or was it like basically being forced to divorce?
well, sure they know. My friends, the fathers was there. My father was in my life. He retired from the post office. He served in the armed force. So, people's lives are different, and regardless of where they live.
Okay.
What can you say about the roles of greed and selfishness in the whole history of
That's a fascinating question.
I'm telling you.
I'm not sure we could summarize that
Elaborate on that.
in a nice pithy way
Don't
in
speak for myself here.
1 minute or two, but
Who wants to handle that one?
well, part of the greed aspect was the construction of it in the first place. That they alluded to in the film, the breaking of the pipes. It turns out that the construction outfits that did the majority of the building cut costs in order to maximize profitability. And one of the things that did not happen until post-construction inspection was that many of the pipes that the construction supervisors were examining as they were constructing the building, when they would see a pipe upon inspection, they would see it covered. Then they would mark it off, covered. When the inspectors left, they would take that stuff off. So it was, and they would shift it around from one place to the next. So instead of insulating every pipe, they would insulate them for show. And they would take that insulation off and move it somewhere else. So you can't see that, though, post-construction. You're not going to tear into drywall and cinder block in order to see that. So part of the issue here is that as these pipes started deteriorating, there's nothing to insulate them from cold. There's nothing to insulate them from the gases that come from sewer piping and such. So once they start breaking, the maintenance people who were there, who were trying to put them back together, were figuring out that you have this internal system of piping that is frankly shoddy. And you can continue to patch it, but eventually you're going to have to replace it, but there's no interest in replacing it.
Right.
If you put 1,000 patches on something, it's still going to eventually leak, break
down.
somewhere. So as they started digging into the construction, they figured out that in many cases, what it looked like and what it truly was were completely different. However, it had the most state-of-the-art steam-operated heating system.
Yes.
That's because Pipe Fitters Local 562 was going to show off. You have one power plant that you can heat 32 buildings. They built the most state-of-the-art steam induction system possible. But then when those guys left to go on different jobs, the maintenance people didn't know how to fix it. So every time somebody would have to come from the outside to fix it, then they would charge double, triple, quadruple time to come fix it. And eventually they stopped coming to fix it.
Right.
So these maintenance guys who have no idea how this thing's supposed to work stopped working on it too. So that's why you would go weeks at a time without any heat, because it was steam heat. And nobody knew how to fix it, plus the piping, the steam was going in many cases, was shoddy in the first place. But that's all post-construction stuff that you don't see until after the fact.
Right.
So when they showed that picture of those construction workers all there doing their jobs, that is true, but in many cases what they were doing was for show, just to get the money out of the project, because it was federal dollars guaranteed. Because the federal government is the best construction pay there is, because it's guaranteed.
Right. Guaranteed.
That's true.
In this time right now, in relevance to Reverend Rice, the situation of trying to take care of homeless in there, what's the city going to do with that? I was involved with Reverend Rice in 75, 76. I was at the YWCA downtown St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
We were in the selling of the building to Reverend Rice at that time. And nobody at that time in that year was even thinking about homeless people as he was. And I know there's some difficulties there, but what now does the city do with that? Or is it, whose responsibility is it?
Well, at least what I'm familiar with is that Reverend Rice is holding 300 men a night in his facility. He doesn't have the license for that. That's one of the problems. And I think each time that he's tried to work with the city, they have sort of an abrasive relationship. So right now, they've sort of deemed his facility like a nuisance. I think that was the word in the paper. So I'm not real sure what exactly is going to happen, except that there have been a number of homeless programs that have actually increased in the city for at least overnight shelter space. So I'm not sure what his situation is now.
How could the city never help get that thing going or whatever? I mean, the Y had like, it was 6 floors. All
Sure.
4 floors were all residents.
Right. I guess they're kind of concerned as to some of his motives. And the only thing I could say is, he's been known, with his television station. He sometimes, and I'm sorry if anyone likes Mr. Rice. I don't really dislike him, but he tends to convince people to make testimonials in return for services. And I think sometimes the city, at least the mayor, I think he takes issue with that. I think that's where the problem is.
Okay.
It's a personality. I think it's more personalities.
I have a question. First of all, James, you and I have met before. In the late 1960s up into the 70s, we walked pizza. And I was a white officer walking by myself in that community. First question is, Larry Rice and I, we go back to the South. And what the young lady over here is asking is, what is the difference between Pruitt-Igoe, Larry Rice's operation, when we started having crime, good people lived there, and they couldn't come out of their apartments because they were frightened? Who was urinating in there? elevators, who was doing the drug business. What is the difference between that, right now, and what Larry's doing up there, and you're building nice buildings around? Those, the poor will always be with you. They're going to be there. Pruitt-Igoe down Tom, in the city of St. Louis, they were living in boxes down there. They weren't African American. They were white.
Mm-hmm.
Go up around St. Louis Avenue, and people were living in there. Without houses, they had cold water supply. There was only one bathhouse in the area. And if you want to take a bath, it cost 3 cents. Go down to the bathhouse. Pruitt-Igoe was a good thought. And there was good people who moved in there.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was a group of people who came in there. And the good people didn't know what to do. They became frightened. The trash laying in the hallway out there, who put that trash? Who took the 5-year-old girl on the 5th floor and sent her down to the trash chute? Who did that? All I'm saying is that what Larry is doing, yes, he's hard at home, but it's the same thing. You're going to have the poor. You have to be a Christian. And my Savior said there'll always be more.
Right.
What are you going to do? And Pruitt-Igoe, there was good people. And if they wanted to get a hold of me, they'd hang a cloth on the window. And then I go walking up, the young lady was talking about, well, they'd stand up on the roof. I knew they were up on the roof. I take 47 Sam, put him out on Jefferson, so everybody looked that way, and I come in the back way, and I would arrest them. You know, how do we help the people who are poor deal with the violence, deal with some parents who are not supervising their children? Because nobody wants to get on an elevator and human waste be there. Nobody wants to open up their door and human waste be outside the door. How do we help those people? What do we do? And they all need jobs, but I have to mention something about a valley or something. I think there was a group of Irish people living up there at one time. There's a church called St. Stanislaus. You have a few Polish people living there one time. And I was dating a Polish girl, and her brother beat me up from the 10. What do you do? How do you help the poor? Because there are very, very good people that when you give their word to you, they will back it up. There are some other people who have a few dollars. They give you the word. They'll trade you going down the hall. And Paul McGee ain't open.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and it's a little bit after 9, and it's about time to go. So one more question, and we'll be done.
Okay.
So first, I just want to thank Ms. Roxanne and Mr. James for coming tonight. We really appreciate you guys coming.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was just wondering if the two of you, as former residents, could finish this out. You know, I think we know there's lots of things to talk about when we talk about Pruitt-Igoe, but I think it would be great for us to hear about what's kind of the lasting legacy for you guys, for people who are really part of the community, and what it meant to really be part of that community for you. If you wouldn't mind, just something to finish us out.
It's close, heart feeling, the friends, like I say, I have right today, they are good friends. Always been there for me in my lifetime. We support each other, encouraging each other. They're inspirational people. So, like I say, I just see the good part of it, All the other, like I say, it's crime everywhere, but, that's just the way it is, It don't outweigh the bad, the good to me. It don't, no. No.
Like the other aspect, just like me and her, we go a long way back. We real close. We close friends, and I love every bit of it.